On May 7th, 2017, in the small town of Bealier, Ohio, the quiet afternoon was shattered by an unexpected tragedy. David Kenny, along with his wife Sherry and their young daughter, had planned a simple visit to their close friend, Brad McGarry. The purpose of the visit was straightforward: return a weed trimmer Brad had lent to David. However, as they approached Brad's house, an unsettling feeling began to grow. When they arrived, no one answered the door, which struck David as odd since Brad's car was parked outside. Concern quickly set in, and David decided to take his family around to the back of the house. There they discovered the service door slightly ajar. Inside, the house was eerily silent and in disarray, with signs of disturbance, suggesting that something terrible had occurred. Sherry called out Brad's name, but there was still no response. Growing increasingly anxious, David decided to search the house. As he ventured down into the basement, he stumbled upon a sight that would haunt him forever: Brad's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Shocked and terrified, David screamed, prompting Sherry to rush downstairs, where she too was confronted with the grim scene. The police were called immediately, and the investigation into Brad's death began. What had started as a simple visit to a friend would soon uncover a chilling and complex mystery. David Kenny was a young man with an ordinary life until a significant event changed his path. At the age of 21, his mother organized a big celebration in his honor, where he met Sherry, a beautiful single mother with 3 young children. During the course of the evening, David felt an immediate connection to Sherry, captivated by her warmth and charm. The next day, he confided in his mother that he had found the love of his life and was determined to make her his partner. Despite the challenges of marrying a woman with 3 children, David was committed to the relationship. His decision was met with some skepticism by those around him, who worried about the heavy responsibilities he would face at such a young age. However, David was undeterred. He was ready to take on the challenges of becoming a father to Sherry's children and building a life together. To support his growing family, David enrolled in a coal mining course. While the job was physically demanding and risky, it offered good pay, allowing David to provide for his household. It was during this training that he met Brad McGarry, a man who would later become a close friend and a significant figure in his life. Their friendship would go on to shape the events that would unfold on May 7th, 2017. Brad McGarry, born in the 1970s in Cambridge, Ohio, had faced many personal challenges while growing up. As an openly gay man in a conservative environment, Brad endured insults and prejudice, but he remained resilient and determined to live authentically. Over the years, he built a close-knit group of friends and pursued a career in hairstyling, despite the challenges of working in a small, working-class town. However, after some time, Brad made a bold decision to leave the beauty industry and transition to coal mining, a stark contrast to his previous profession. It was through his work in coal mining that Brad crossed paths with David Kenny. The 2 men quickly became friends, with their bond growing stronger over time. Brad became a beloved figure in the Kenny family, even earning the affectionate nickname of Uncle Brad from David's children. The 2 friends shared many moments together, often joking and enjoying each other's company. By 2017, David was 30 years old, happily married to Sherry, and raising a family, while Brad continued to balance his work, family time, and a secret romantic relationship. Despite the contrasting paths they had taken in life, their friendship remained close, and Brad was an integral part of David's life. However, Brad was also navigating his own struggles, particularly in his personal life, which would soon come to light in the events leading up to his death. On May 7th, 2017, David, along with his wife Sherry and their youngest daughter, decided to stop by Brad's house to return a weed trimmer. When they arrived, they were surprised to find that Brad didn't answer the door, even though his car was parked outside. Concerned, they went around to the back of the house and discovered the service door was slightly ajar. As they entered the house, they were struck by the disarray inside, with signs that something was wrong. Sherry called out for Brad, but there was no response, and a growing sense of worry settled over them. David decided to check the basement, where the situation took a chilling turn. He discovered Brad's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. David's scream quickly alerted Sherry, who rushed downstairs to find the same horrifying scene. In shock, Sherry immediately called 911, and the police were soon on their way. Upon arriving, the police found David and Sherry visibly shaken, and they learned that the couple had come to check on their close friend Brad, only to find the tragic scene. The Kenny family shared how deeply connected they were to Brad, describing him as someone who was like family. They explained that they had even planned a trip to the Bahamas together that summer. When questioned about any potential enemies or recent issues in Brad's life, David and Sherry mentioned Brad's recent breakup with a man named Scotty, describing their relationship as tumultuous and full of conflict. This would become a crucial lead in the investigation. As the investigation into Brad's death began, the police initially considered several theories. Brad's body was found face down in the basement, surrounded by a large pool of blood, and it was clear that he had been shot at least once in the head. However, the officers initially speculated that Brad might have taken his own life, a theory that seemed plausible due to the absence of a weapon at the scene. A forensic expert, however, quickly dispelled this idea when the body was turned over, revealing there was no weapon in sight. Further inspection of the house revealed a ransacked kitchen and living room, but no valuables appeared to be missing. This suggested that the scene had been staged to look like a robbery gone wrong. Despite the apparent disarray, items of value, including money and expensive art that Brad had collected, were left untouched. This raised suspicions that the motive for the crime was not theft. The police also considered the possibility that Brad's death might have been related to his sexuality, given his position as an openly gay man working in a conservative environment. They interviewed Brad's co-workers at the coal mine, but they all spoke highly of him, and there was no indication that he had any enemies there. This theory was soon ruled out. Detectives then turned their attention to Brad's personal life and his recent breakup with Scotty. According to David and Sherry, the relationship had been turbulent, with frequent arguments. The police obtained Scotty's full name and discovered that he had been in jail for violating his probation at the time of Brad's death. This immediately ruled Scotty out as the killer, though the possibility that he may have orchestrated the crime from behind bars with an accomplice was still being considered. The investigation hit a turning point when a cousin of Brad's revealed that Brad had mentioned a man named DJ, who was expected to visit him that afternoon. Brad had joked that he and DJ were planning to take a nap together, hinting at a romantic involvement. This revelation took the investigation in a completely new direction. The cousin also revealed that Brad had been seeing DJ for years in secret, and that DJ was married but had not yet come out to his wife. The shocking twist came when it was revealed that DJ was none other than David Kenny, the very man who had discovered Brad's body. This revelation shifted the investigation, turning David from a witness to the prime suspect in Brad's murder. The detectives began gathering more evidence, and the investigation into David's possible involvement in Brad's death intensified. As the investigation into David Kenny's involvement deepened, the detectives began to gather more compelling evidence that linked him to the crime scene. When the police retrieved David's phone, they discovered that his location data confirmed that he had been at Brad's house at the time of the shooting. Although David had deleted some incriminating text messages, further forensic analysis revealed exchanges between him and Brad that confirmed their romantic relationship, which had been kept secret for years. In addition to the phone data, footage from a neighbor's surveillance camera showed David arriving at Brad's house shortly before the estimated time of the murder. Interestingly, David had arrived in his wife's car, not his own, and stayed for around 40 minutes before leaving. Hours later, David returned to the house with his family, under the pretense of delivering a weed trimmer that Brad had supposedly requested. This timeline contradicted David's earlier story, which painted him as an innocent visitor who had stumbled upon the crime scene by chance. Confronted with this mounting evidence, David initially stuck to his story. During a lengthy interrogation, he gave multiple conflicting versions of events, claiming at one point that an unidentified third man had been present at Brad's house and that this person had shot Brad during an argument, threatening David into silence. However, the detectives were not convinced by this version of events. As the pressure mounted, David's story shifted, and he eventually confessed to having an affair with Brad. David claimed that he had only recently tried to end the relationship with Brad, and that Brad had become angry when David wanted to break things off. He described a heated confrontation, during which Brad allegedly brandished a gun. David stated that the argument escalated into a physical struggle, and in the heat of the moment, he had shot Brad in self-defense. He also admitted to shooting Brad a second time while Brad was on the ground. However, forensic evidence quickly debunked David's self-defense claim. An autopsy revealed that Brad had been shot twice in the back of the head, indicating that the shooter had been standing behind him, not in front of him as David had described. Furthermore, the absence of a weapon, which David claimed to have discarded while fleeing, made his version of events even more improbable. David's confession and the physical evidence placed him at the scene of the crime, but the murder weapon was never recovered. Despite this, the detectives were confident that they had their suspect, and David was arrested and charged with the murder of Brad McGarry. David's trial began in mid-2017, and it became clear that the prosecution had a strong case. The evidence against him, including the surveillance footage, phone data, and forensic findings, painted a damning picture. The prosecution argued that David had been hiding his affair with Brad, and that Brad had threatened to expose the truth to David's wife, Sherry. This gave David a clear motive for murder, to protect his double life and maintain his family. During the trial, the prosecution presented the surveillance video from the neighbor's camera, showing David arriving at Brad's house before the murder and returning with his family later, under the false pretense of delivering a weed trimmer. They also introduced body cam footage from the police investigation, which captured David's contradictory statements and emotional distress after discovering Brad's body. This footage further supported the claim that David was not just a grieving friend, but someone trying to cover up his involvement in the crime. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence was the forensic expert's testimony. The expert revealed that DNA from a used condom found in Brad's house showed that Brad's DNA was on the outside, while the inside contained the DNA of an unknown male, later confirmed not to be David's. This raised more questions about David's motivations and actions, suggesting that the murder might have been planned and not a spur-of-the-moment act of self-defense, as David had initially claimed. The defense team, however, maintained that David had acted in self-defense, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. They argued that David had been pushed to his breaking point by Brad's demands and threats. While acknowledging that David had not been entirely truthful, the defense contended that his actions should be considered manslaughter, not murder. After deliberating for several hours, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. David Kenny was guilty of the aggravated murder of Brad McGarry. The courtroom was filled with emotion as the decision was announced. David's apology to Brad's family, while heartfelt, did little to mitigate the gravity of his crime. In his statement, David expressed deep regret, stating that he never intended for Brad to die and wished he could turn back time. However, his remorse was not enough to change the course of justice. The judge, after hearing both the prosecution and defense arguments, found David's actions to be cold and premeditated. The fact that he had planned the murder, staged the crime scene, and taken steps to cover up his involvement pointed to a calculated execution rather than an act of self-defense. Consequently, David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with an additional 3 years for using a firearm during the crime. David's sentence was a tragic end to a case that had been shaped by secrecy, betrayal, and lies. His actions had not only led to the loss of Brad's life, but had also devastated the families and friends left behind. As of 2023, David remained incarcerated, while his family continued to deal with the fallout from his actions. The case serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of keeping secrets and the devastating consequences that can arise from trying to maintain a double life. The aftermath of Brad McGarry's death left a profound impact on everyone involved. For David Kenny, his conviction and life sentence meant the end of his once promising future. What had started as a simple, albeit complicated life with a wife and children had spiraled into an irreversible tragedy. His family, who had once supported him, now had to come to terms with the horrifying truth about what David had done. Sherry, his wife, was left in shock and disbelief. She had spent years building a life with David, raising their children together, and trusting him implicitly. The revelation of his affair with Brad and the murder that followed destroyed their relationship and shattered her perception of the man she had loved. She had no prior knowledge of the affair, and the cruel betrayal left her in emotional turmoil. Despite his confession, Sherry's sorrow and heartbreak were compounded by the realization that she had been living in a lie for so many years. Brad's family and friends also struggled with the emotional weight of his death. His loss was felt deeply by those who had known him as a kind and generous person, often seen as a second father figure to David's children. His tragic death not only robbed them of a dear friend, but also left them grappling with the complex layers of betrayal and secrecy that had unfolded. The case highlighted the devastating consequences of living a double life. David's inability to reconcile his secret affair with his family obligations drove him to commit an unforgivable act. His need to maintain his personal relationships, despite their destructive nature, ultimately led to the loss of both Brad's life and David's future. This case also prompted broader discussions about the pressure of maintaining hidden identities, especially in small conservative communities where secrets are often difficult to keep. It also underscored the destructive potential of toxic relationships, even those that may seem inconspicuous on the surface. Brad's death became a tragic reminder of how unresolved emotions and unspoken truths can lead to irreversible consequences. The families affected by this crime will continue to carry the emotional scars for the rest of their lives. For David, his life sentence without parole meant that he would never have the opportunity to make amends for his actions, leaving him to reflect on the irreversible choices he had made. As of 2023, David remains in prison, his appeal for parole consistently denied. His life is now marked by the consequences of his crime, a crime that not only ended Brad's life, but also tore apart the lives of those who loved him, leaving a wake of pain, betrayal, and loss. The case serves as a tragic lesson about the devastating outcomes of secrets, lies, and the extreme lengths some are willing to go to preserve them. David Kenny's trial concluded with the jury finding him guilty of the aggravated murder of Brad McGarry. Throughout the trial, the prosecution presented compelling evidence, including surveillance footage, forensic analysis, and testimony from witnesses. Despite David's defense team attempting to argue that his actions were driven by fear and self-defense, the overwhelming evidence pointed to a deliberate, premeditated crime. During the trial, key pieces of evidence included the neighbor's surveillance video, which captured David arriving at Brad's house before the murder and leaving hours later with his family. The prosecution also highlighted inconsistencies in David's testimony, where he initially claimed to have discovered Brad's body by accident, but later admitted to his affair and provided a version of events that did not match the physical evidence. Forensic analysis further contradicted David's story, revealing that Brad had been shot twice in the back of the head, disproving any claim of self-defense. As the case unfolded, the defense attempted to portray David as a loving husband and father who had been driven to commit a crime under extraordinary stress. They argued that his actions were not premeditated, but rather a tragic result of an escalating conflict. However, the prosecution maintained that David had orchestrated Brad's murder to keep his affair hidden and protect his family life. In the final stages of the trial, David's defense team sought to reduce his bail, presenting character witnesses who spoke about his good nature and how he had been a responsible, hard-working man before the tragedy. Despite these testimonies, the judge was unmoved and bail was not reduced. David's sentencing in February 2018 was the final chapter in this tragic case. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole, with an additional 3 years for firearm specifications. This sentence reflected the severity of the crime, emphasizing that David's actions had been calculated and intentional. The judge cited the brutality of the murder and David's subsequent attempts to cover up his actions, particularly in light of his betrayal of both Brad and his own family. The sentence of life without parole was a stark reminder of the irreversible nature of David's actions. In a poignant moment before sentencing, David apologized to Brad's family, expressing regret for the pain he had caused. Yet the judge made it clear that no amount of remorse could undo the damage done. The consequences of his actions would affect not only his own life, but the lives of everyone who loved Brad and trusted David. David's conviction and life sentence, without the possibility of parole, were the final legal consequences of his actions. The trial and subsequent sentencing marked the end of his journey as a free man, but the emotional repercussions of his crime will resonate far beyond the courtroom for years to come. David Kenny's conviction and life sentence, without the possibility of parole, left a profound impact on all those involved in the case. For his family, the reality of David's betrayal was devastating. His wife, Sherry, was blindsided by his actions and the double life he had been living. Throughout the investigation and trial, she was forced to confront not only her husband's infidelity, but also the brutal murder of a man she had considered a close friend. Sherry's emotional turmoil was evident, especially during the courtroom hearings where she expressed her shock and disbelief. The loss of Brad McGarry was equally tragic. Brad had been a beloved figure to David's family, particularly to his children, who had grown up with him as a trusted friend and uncle. His death left a gaping hole in the lives of those who loved him, and the circumstances surrounding his murder only amplified the sense of grief. Brad's family, too, was forced to grapple with the brutality of his death, coupled with the betrayal from someone they had considered a close confidant. For the community of Bealier, Ohio, the events were both shocking and sobering. A small town known for its tight-knit relationships was rocked by the revelation of a murder involving someone who had been considered an upstanding member of that community. The idea that David, a man who had been trusted by many, could commit such a heinous act left the town in a state of disbelief. Reflecting on the case, law enforcement officials remarked that the entire tragedy could have been avoided if David had been more open about his sexuality in his relationships. His fear of being exposed and the subsequent lies he told ultimately led to the fatal confrontation with Brad. His inability to confront his personal life with honesty caused irreparable harm, not only to his own family, but to the life of a man who had been a close friend. The legal proceedings, while bringing some sense of closure to the case, did little to ease the emotional scars left behind. David's life, his family's life, and Brad's family's life were all changed forever by the murder. For David, the promise of a future behind bars was now his reality. For everyone else, the pain of his betrayal and the loss of Brad would remain, as they were left to reflect on what could have been avoided if only the truth had been confronted before it was too late.